First of all, let me introduce myself. I work as a librarian in a small research library in Serbia. It's a very small institute, about 40 people. And I don't have really many opportunities for training in my home institution, but I'm involved in several other organizations and initiatives, mostly non-formal. So I actually do a lot of training. On average, I have 50 to 60 training sessions a year with all sorts of stakeholders, librarians, but mostly researchers. So I would like to explain at the beginning that this presentation will probably be the most suitable for those of you who are working with researchers and who don't have a budget, who work with limited resources. For the others, they will probably need to upgrade the model I will be presenting today. So I will first talk about the content of presentations that I prepare for training on academic integrity. And in the second part, I will talk a little bit more about the approaches. I will share some tips. I will explain the formats of those training sessions. So please feel free to put questions in Q&A. I will try to be on time and to respond to as many questions as possible. So this is the basic definition of academic integrity, and it also applies to research integrity. You have to comply with certain ethical and professional principles. All kinds of stakeholders, individuals, institutions have to comply to these principles, and these principles apply to education, research, and scholarship. And what will I try to explain today is that they have to apply throughout the research cycle. This is particularly important. So this is the content outline. I will just briefly mention the topics that we cover and give some hints about these topics. So I won't present the content. I will just present the outline of the content. So as I already mentioned, my major audience are researchers. I also work with students, but with PhD students. I have never worked with undergraduate students, and I would like to try this very much. And I understand that this is a particular challenge. And also what is peculiar of my audience is that I have many researchers that are involved in publishing. In Serbia, we have nearly 500 journals. Most of them are open access, and most of them are diamond open access. So researchers from Serbia work as volunteers in editorial boards. They do peer review for these journals. They do peer review for other journals as well. Some of them are editors of these journals, and they put a lot of effort in upgrading these journals, in promoting them. And when they attend trainings, especially the trainings related to research integrity, they ask many questions that are actually related to the publishing process. So I usually have different perspectives in the audience. Some of them are trying to adopt the principles and to adopt skills in order to apply them themselves, and the others would like to be informed about these principles and practices in order to check whether other participants in the publishing process apply them correctly. So this is an interesting perspective for me, and I have to adjust training to the audience. My approach is to adjust training to the audience. This is not a single model that is just presented to anyone. I usually, when I know who is in my audience, I try to adjust the topics to shorten some of them, to extend others. And that's important. Also, what I always try to do is to place the training, place the topic of academic integrity in a wider context. And this is very important because, for example, if we work with students and young researchers who are at the beginning of their career, and we don't give them the big picture, they just tend to lack awareness of why it is really important. They tend to adopt it as a set of rules. And if you take rules for granted and don't know their purpose, you are more likely to disobey these rules or to try to avoid them. So if we give them a broader picture, we tend to develop an awareness in them. So these wider contexts that are relevant for me, social responsibility. Not all students will be researchers. Some of them will be just professionals, and it's very important for them because the same principles are translated into everyday life, and they will have to comply with the same principles in their everyday work as professionals. So this is important as well. Responsible research and innovation, a rather new and very complex concept that is particularly promoted by the European Union. And my main context is always open science. This is my central, it is central to my work as a research librarian. So usually I place academic integrity in the context of open science. This is the basic scheme, a kind of a roadmap, a route that we pass through the training. And I will explain this later, probably in greater detail, but this is just to give you a gist of the training. So this route, I usually pass along this route during one training session. These are the topics, the main topics, the main points that we address during the training. But this same route can be extended because it's modular. It can be extended and upgraded to serve as a course. Each of these points can be expanded, including other topics, including greater detail, including more examples, including some hands-on training and it can be, each of these points can be a separate training session or even more training sessions, and these can be expanded to serve as a course. I usually don't have this opportunity because my training sessions are not so structured. My training commitment is not so structured. I usually do it on an informal basis because I usually do training that is not for people from my institution because there are few of them. And when they need training, they just visit me and have in-person training adjusted to them personally. So I usually, I'm involved in several librarians associations. We have our research libraries have a very active association, and we do trainings on a volunteer basis. So the model is such, I observe a problem, I observe that researchers don't understand a particular topic, then I have an idea how to design training. Then I ask my colleagues, so hey, okay, I don't have the resources. I don't have a presentation room. I can't be a host to the training. Can any one of you provide this? Then some colleagues say, okay, our institute has a good training room, so you can come here. And we invite researchers, usually from several institutions, to come there. And it's usually on a zero budget. So it's based on volunteer work and good collaboration between librarians. Most research librarians in Serbia are the only librarians at their institutions. So we are trying to help each other in this work. So that's why I haven't developed a course yet, but this is usually a single training session that may vary in length, but the same concept can be upgraded to serve as a course. So I also indicated here the directions in which particular topics can develop. So you can also upgrade it to by adding other courses, for example, a course on open science, a course on research data management. So it's very, very, very extensible. After I define the general context, after I give a big picture, I provide some definitions very briefly, because these concepts will be explained during the training session, and I usually cite some documents. I define the principles of academic integrity. The central document in this area is the Singapore Statement of Research Integrity, released in 2010. And I also define what we may call unethical practices. If you speak to students, it's okay to say just unethical practices and don't provide any further classifications. There are many classifications. The most common is a classification into misconduct and questionable research practices. And this may be too complicated for students to explain. There is sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between some elements of misconduct and some elements of questionable research practices. Misconduct is usually described as something that is actually not a research practice at all. It's plagiarism, falsification, fabrication, data fabrication. This is misconduct. And questionable research practices, they usually have to do with a conflict of interest, with some failures to either intentional or unintentional to present all the data, the lack of transparency. So if you're working with students, especially undergraduate students, you don't have to explain this classification. It's just okay to say unethical practices. I usually explain the differences, because researchers encounter these terms in the literature and blog posts, so it's important for them to know. Then after that, I always present a legal framework, especially if there are some documents in place at the institution. For example, at the faculty, if there is a code of ethics, a code of conduct, if there is a rule book. I present this because it's relevant, because it applies to the actions of the stakeholders affiliated with this institution. So it's important. This is usually very brief. I provide links. I try to indicate that some international bodies and organizations also have codes of ethics, and that it's important to comply with these codes of ethics. And if I work with researchers, then they apply for European projects. They're involved in European projects. So I explain the codes of conduct that are applicable in the European Union. And after that, I start explaining what is actually the main content of any discussion on academic integrity. And I tend to focus on good practice first. It's not good, we'll learn this when we study logic, it's not good to provide negative definitions. So it's important to say what good practice is, and not to define good practice as an opposition to a negative practice. We should always keep in mind that many researchers and many students who actually fail to comply with some rules and with good practice do this unintentionally, because they don't know what good practice is. So it's important to introduce them to good practice and to show them how to do things properly, and only then to explain what is wrong. I've already mentioned, I try not to focus only on writing. Actually, the writing is an area where it's the easiest to observe good and bad practices. But I usually try to explain how ethical principles apply throughout the research process. So I briefly mentioned data collection and data interpretation stages, and I give some hints how to check the validity of sources, how to identify unreliable information, fake news. But actually, when I work with general audience, mentioning too many examples that are discipline specific may be counterproductive. So it's always good to do more detailed training on these stages of research process for discipline-specific audiences, and it's also a good idea to involve researchers who know more about these processes of data collection. Librarians are not always competent to explain, for example, how data is collected in medical research or in chemistry. So this is just a brief mention, just to give them the idea that it's not all about writing. Then we come to writing. This is presented in greater detail. And the main idea is to encourage, this is a tricky issue, a very complex issue, and the main idea is to encourage students to develop writing skills. This is not related only to ethical concerns. This is related to very complex concepts such as critical thinking, which is crucial, and which is actually the crucial point why a training is successful or is not successful. It depends on our ability to encourage critical thinking. And also it largely depends on the overall disciplinary knowledge and linguistic proficiency, because when researchers have to write their papers in a foreign language, we may expect that they will be more prone to some bad practices, for example, to plagiarism, because they feel insecure and they just tend to copy more than they should. So I don't have definitive answers in this area. We need new approaches, and we need to develop new approaches in this kind of training with researchers, with university professors, with senior researchers. But it's important to highlight that not everything is about technical aspects, that actually there is something more important and something that doesn't depend only on us or on training. What is required in this area is hands-on training, because we can never be sure about the adoption rate during presentation. We need to see how researchers trying. And also, I usually see while presenting this section, I usually see that researchers are not very proficient when it comes to literature search, that they don't know how to find and evaluate data, that the information literacy is an issue. So it's always recommended, if you can, just accompany this stage of training, this area of training, with additional training in these areas. I also insist, we try to, for example, to explain how to credit sources, which sources are relevant. This is a difficult issue because it's related to disciplinary knowledge. And we also, I usually try to include retractions database. And why it is important, this is an issue that has been identified only recently. Researchers often cite papers that they find in bibliographic databases, or that they find in other papers as references, but some of these papers may be retracted. So we now have a tool. If we have tools to resolve a problem, then we present these tools. And I also like very much, because it's very useful, to highlight post-publication peer review platforms, especially PubPeer, which has, we can show it later if you are interested at the end during Q&A. PubPeer has a plugin that indicates whether a paper is disputed or not, whether there are some comments about these papers. So I usually try to be familiar with these tools, try to test them, and try to include new tools in these presentations, especially if they are technically oriented. Also, I try to explain the basic concepts of what is quotation, what are citations. This is usually clear. Referencing, this is also usually clear. Citation styles were a great problem in my country 10 years ago. Now researchers are more familiar with various citation styles because they publish in international journals more than before, but they insufficiently use reference manager tools, and I organize training on this. And this training is quite popular, but the adoption rate is, in my opinion, unsatisfactory. So we usually offer them, we explain that there's various citation styles, but they always say, okay, but you can automate this process by using some tools because tools are available. Another issue that I usually include, because I see it as a great issue in my country, and I believe in other countries too, is crediting images. The awareness that images should be credited is quite poor. Researchers don't know how to do this properly. And I focus on this kind of training, and I try to organize in-person training for this area. Then we switch to misconduct, and also I try to explain various types of misconduct. I provide definitions, and I provide quite many examples, and I try to explain these examples. And the same applies to this. This is discipline specific, so there more examples are included. If we know the audience, if the audience is limited to one discipline, if there is a general audience, then the number of examples is smaller, and I just mentioned one or two very striking examples. And then I deal with plagiarism in great detail. This is also a tricky issue. Usually there are many questions. I usually let researchers or any other participants ask questions while I'm talking. I let them interrupt me. So I have to be very careful when it comes to plagiarism, because it's sometimes very difficult to have time enough to cover all the questions and to cover all the other topics planned. There are many misconceptions about plagiarism, especially, for example, in my country, tolerance to some kinds of plagiarism is very high, especially for self-plagiarism or patchwork plagiarism, when people combine a few sentences from one source, a few sentences from other source. Even when they provide proper citations, this kind of combining text without any original content is very problematic. It's considered plagiarism as well. So sometimes it's difficult to explain this. I try to explain the paraphrasing, how they should paraphrase. This is usually not an issue once they understand that, for example, patchwork plagiarism is not okay. Then they understand, okay, I will paraphrase, it's okay. Also, I try to highlight that there are copyright concerns. In my country, copyright awareness is very poor. So I usually try to highlight that copyright breaches are usually involved when we talk about plagiarism, that some kinds of plagiarism involve copyright concerns. And we don't, our universities are not, our universities use Authenticate only for PhD thesis, and plagiarism checking is centralized. So I personally don't work with, I don't have access to plagiarism checking tools. Some faculties are subscribed to Ephorus. Publishers are subscribed to Authenticate. Some of them, it's too expensive for them. So I usually have many questions regarding the tools, because people don't have access to them and they don't know how they operate. And I usually try to explain in great detail the limitations of these software tools. I explained that they rely on a database. containing some content. So authenticate contains journal articles, some other, for example, a forest contains students' papers. And the efficiency of these tools may be limited in non-English languages. And also I tend to explain the difference between plagiarism detection and similarity checking, because those tools check the similarity between texts, and plagiarism detection involves the evaluation of what is automatically detected. So it involves a human factor. We need a human to evaluate whether something is plagiarism or not, because what will be identified as similar depends also on the settings of the tools we are using. Sometimes I mention free tools. These free tools are limited for researchers. They are not of great use. They may be of use for students, especially if they use online resources, websites, but they are of little use for researchers because they don't cover research papers if they are not open access. So this is a point when we may also highlight the importance of open access and open science. But usually there are many questions, and I try to make it as clear as possible what they can expect if they're using these tools or not. What I always try to avoid is oversimplification. For example, when we explain to researchers plagiarism using very simple examples, it seems that they understand everything. When we come to more complex examples that involve, for example, several types of plagiarism, or translation plagiarism, or paraphrasing, which is not properly cited, where sources are not properly cited, then they get lost and they don't identify this as plagiarism. So I usually try to avoid oversimplifications and to say them, okay, this is complex, this is difficult. Don't expect it to be simple. If you have any issues, just contact librarians, contact experts, and don't make any judgments based on superficial observations, because we need to be responsible. Also, this is usually very interesting and very engaging during presentations when we come to explaining the consequences of unethical practices, the crisis of peer review, the replication crisis. Compromised trust to science is something that we can observe in our everyday lives over the past year. So this is something where researchers usually know, they are able to cite examples from their own lives, and it's usually very engaging and very interesting. They usually have some comments. And it's a good starting point for any follow-up discussions in various directions. Also, I briefly refer to actions against misconduct. There are some procedures that are mentioned in codes of conduct at the university level. If they exist, I mention them. Also, I tend to cite notable examples of penalized misconduct when the procedure is over, when we know that someone, when it's established that someone has committed misconduct and that misconduct is punished. It's important for students and researchers to know that it is that there are consequences, that they cannot go away with this just like this. It's difficult. It takes time. Whistleblowers are usually encounter many problems. They are sometimes exposed to various kinds of abuse, but at the end of the story, misconduct is very often penalized. So I usually try to explain this, and this is also a good starting point for discussion, and it's usually very, very engaging. I will now go to try to explain some tips, methods, formats, and tools that I used very briefly. As I've already explained, if you have a modular structure of your training, you can upgrade it very easily by expanding the key topics in it. And it's good if you try to expand it, then it's good to mix media, to mix lectures, hands-on sessions. For example, I have an opportunity to do hands-on sessions only when I work with individual researchers, but it's interesting to do this in group. It may be even more engaging, even more efficient. So a good idea if you are creating a course to include as many hands-on sessions as possible. Also, homeworks assignment. One of a good idea for practice is to select some text to give them to your participants to read them at home, and then to discuss or to give them some assignments that they may complete at home and present during training sessions. And also it's good to include, if you have resources, to include videos, podcasts, multimedia, whatever. And also, if you have a modular concept, then you can translate it into an online environment, which actually we've done. We did it last year quite successfully. If you have resources, then the sky is the limit. You should use all available means because one size doesn't fit all. Various participants have various preferences. We all have our learning strategies. For example, I'm a visual type. I usually learn through reading. And if I have to listen or to watch a presentation, then my learning process is, the adoption rate is lower. Some other people prefer videos, and they learn most when they watch videos. So if you have different types of audience, different people in the audience, you should use all means available, especially if you have resources. Also, you should engage professionals, and you should try to engage as much as possible expert professors, senior researchers, principal investigators, whoever is willing to join. The focus should always be on developing critical thinking. As I've already mentioned, this is the key point, especially in this type of training. And it's good to organize a social media campaign and to share. This is, for example, this is something that I don't have time to do, and sometimes I'm sorry that I don't have time to do, but it is efficient because you have, especially younger audience, they're present on social media. My approach is actually it's limited by limited resources and by limited time that I can assign to this activity, but it's extremely user-oriented. I always try to grasp what users need, and the training for me, training is a learning process for me, and I tend to upgrade my trainings based on the feedback that I get from researchers. And my main medium is live presentations with the audience there. I've managed to adjust myself to online presentations, I believe, quite well, but this is not the same thing. I certainly prefer live trainings with lively discussion. Also, I always tend to provide real-time examples, not side examples that are frequently mentioned in literature. I try to find examples that I identify as the most relevant for my audience, because some examples are not interesting for local audience, that don't apply to them. And I share all my training materials, and I share them on a dedicated website, because as I already mentioned, we have this Association of Research Librarians, and we have a website that we maintain for free ourselves. And what I don't do, and I will have to start doing, is I recorded sessions. I'm absolutely, I get panic stricken when somebody mentions this to me. I'm not sure I'd be able to do this, and I actually plan to write a kind of script and let somebody else speak. This is the medium. This medium is not natural to me, so this is what I'm not doing at the moment. But I will have to reconsider this idea. These are the formats that I use, and you may use any other formats. But I will present this because I'm presenting my experience, so maybe of some use. I usually do some lectures, quite conventional, of various durations. I use semi-structured conversations with very small groups, usually 2 or 3 people. They come to my office or I come to their office, and we do training, and very frequently I do one-on-one training. And I also do individual consultations with researchers, not only from my institute. When I organize a lecture, I usually have a brief introduction to see who my audience are. Sometimes this is an icebreaker task. I will show this particular task later. And but it's more often it's an informal conversation. I ask them whether they had some previous training or not, and I get some information there. Then I have a verbal presentation and a PowerPoint, and the tone is usually polemic. It's engaging. Sometimes I skip the definitions. I put them on the presentation so that they can read, but I focus on examples. And I try to provide quite many examples, and they are free to interrupt whenever. I also sometimes I ask them after each subsection, I ask them to see their response, whether they're interested or whether they've missed something. And then we have a Q&A session. In this kind of training, I cover all the topics I've mentioned before. When I have those semi-structured conversations, we usually select some topics. Either participants identify these topics themselves, or through conversation with them, I identify these topics. I see what they don't know, they don't understand. And then I present these things. These are usually short presentations, but we have an extensive Q&A session, and we try to analyze examples. For example, a particular text that contains plagiarism, we try to analyze it to identify this, or we try to identify places in the text where the author should have cited sources, but the sources are not cited, etc. And individual consultations are quite similar to this, with usually a single person. But during these individual consultations, I provide practical assistance. For example, if we have to resolve copyright issues related to images, then I do this for one image, demonstrate this, and then I say, okay, now you will repeat the same, and I try to control the process. There are many examples what can be done during these. This is usually very inspiring, and through these sessions, I learn a lot about participants. They are more open, they share their views, and they share their concerns. When you have an audience of about 30 or 50 people, they're less likely to, some people are shy, and they're less likely to share their opinions. In individual sessions, they're very, very relaxed, and they feel free to share this. So my tips are: be flexible, as much flexible as possible. When you work with limited resources, various situations may occur, so you have to have an alternative plan. For example, the internet doesn't operate in the hosting institution. You need to have an alternative solution, an alternative for this. I usually put I put many slides, and I put many screenshots in slides so that I can, if I'm expected to explain a procedure, I can usually explain this procedure just by presenting slides. So it's a good solution. It's always a good idea to prepare materials in the local language. Although materials are available in English, plenty of materials. I usually share these materials, but the adoption rate is much better when we have materials in Serbian. I've already mentioned, I try to handpick examples that I will present, those that I identify as relevant. And when I work with students, with PhD students, I tend to use less complex examples because I don't want to confuse them. And I also, it's a good idea to share links in the chat during online sessions. I have a specific perception on this. I put many links in my presentations, not in this one. I will explain why at the end. But I usually put many links in the presentations because some people cannot listen attentively. And if they want to use their mobile phone and to watch something, perhaps they know a lot about the topic and it's not interesting to them. So I provide links and some of them just go visit those links and then they ask questions. So I don't mind if they don't listen to all the words I say. I just want them to be engaged in any useful way. So I usually like to share links to engage them in this way. There are tricky issues in my country. The most tricky issues are those related to some bad practices that are widely accepted. For example, missing to cite some sources or self-plagiarism is tolerated among senior researchers still quite often. So it's very difficult if I have young researchers who get different kinds of information from their tutors. And then they usually oppose when I say zero tolerance to plagiarism. And then they say, well, but my tutor says this is allowed, this is okay. So sometimes it's difficult to explain that it is not okay, and you need to be straightforward when it comes to this. The most hated issue for me is a question about permitted similarity percentage. This permitted similarity percentage may make sense in student papers. It may be good to define it. But I usually get these questions from editors who say, okay, is it okay if I have a conference paper and I change 70% of the text and want to publish it as a journal article? Then I say, okay, how do you determine 70%? 70% of what? Of contents or of words? So it's a tricky issue. Sometimes it takes time, a lot of time. It needs time during training sessions to explain this. And also, I try to avoid too simple examples because I already mentioned this, they create the impression that everything is understood, but it's not understood. And we only, when it comes to practical application, that we see that it's not understood. My presentations are usually detailed, but before I started doing so many trainings, I tried to make them visually appealing. Now I try to make them lightweight, and I tried them to make neutral so that my colleagues can reuse them if they want to organize similar kind of training. I usually provide links and further reading, and I see that I get feedback. Participants like this. They like to have links and they like to have the presentation. So even if all the materials are available on a website, they like to have a presentation to get it. Some of them even print those presentations. So I always keep this on mind when I plan training. And also I encourage other colleagues to share their presentations. If they don't have a website, they can share them on SlideShare, and even better, they can share them on Zenodo, create a Zenodo community, a dedicated Zenodo community, and share all the presentations there. Sometimes I share my presentations before. If I want, for example, to encourage questions, then I send presentation in advance, a day or two in advance, so that they can read through it and prepare some questions. Interactions is crucial. And there are various ways to encourage interaction, and what is a pressing issue nowadays is how to encourage it in online training, because it's connected with some technical limitations. Not all people can engage. What I find efficient is Google Drive collaborative notes on Google Documents. I like it because these materials are reusable. For example, I participated in quite many conferences when we used those shared documents, and it's very good because it reminds me of the conference, of the topics. I've saved these documents, and then I can use the text. It's reusable. For example, Jamboard may be attractive. It's a whiteboard when participants, it's very interactive. But if you put some text on it, when you export it, it's exported as an image, and it's not reusable. I try to be sustainable and to use probably less appealing tools, but those that ensure usability. I've presented some exercises here. I use this, you can read it. I will, if you have time, I explain them in detail. I usually use this top right as an icebreaker during my training sessions, because it actually reveals search strategies and reveals information literacy. And it's a good icebreaker and a starting point for my presentations of academic integrity. I don't use games, but you can. Now, this is brand new. This was published yesterday, a piece of news about this online game. You can watch the video. It's interesting, and it's very suitable for students. If you work with students, it's very suitable. So I've already mentioned this. Working in an online environment is actually, it's a very interesting experience for me. There are many problems, usually technical, but we are yet to develop genuinely online solutions. What we are doing now is merely a translation of our everyday life practices into an online environment. There is a lot of improvisation here. It's quite exciting for me, but this is an issue that we will have to address, and we will have to take a creative approach to this. And I've shared some concerns of mine here. I panic when everybody is muted, and I will never get used to it. So, but we have to deal with this. My plan for this, I will try to introduce multimedia. I will explain before. Probably I'll write a script and somebody else will read it. It's very good if you have some recordings available all the time on the website. Perhaps if I get assistance from some colleagues, we may develop a full course from this model, based on this model. And I will try to explain new tools and formats. I expect an accelerated development of new tools after the situation with the pandemic. And I've made a first step now. Instead of sharing links and publications in the presentation as links, I've created a Zotero group with some more than 100 references, blog posts, journal articles. It's free to use, and everybody is free to join and contribute. So feel free to join and use it in your training sessions. So that's all from my side, and I'm ready for questions now.
Thanks a lot, Milica. That was wonderful. So we have 5 excellent questions, 6 now. Let me start. They are all in Q&A, but I will also read them to you. So Esther is asking, kindly share with us your experiences on plagiarism in mathematics field. Seemingly similarity index is usually high due to factors such as common formulas that mathematicians use.
That's why I try to explain the complexity of the problem. Whenever you have a similarity check, the results of similarity check, they need to be checked and evaluated by an expert in the field. There is no use of this automatic check, and 30% actually mean nothing if they are not evaluated properly. And also, there are many ways to trick similarity checking tools and get 5% similarity, while actually everything is. I had the personal experience of such a paper, patchwork plagiarism, where the authors actually combined different sentences, not from journal articles, but from some technical papers, and they were available in PDF on the internet, and they were quite difficult to track. So I personally, I've discovered plagiarism on multiple occasions. I usually use Google, put some sentences. It's about reading. When you notice some inconsistency in style, this usually indicates something for me. For example, you have a few sentences that are in line with one style, and then something completely different. So this indicates something. And then I usually check, and that's how I discovered plagiarism. So it may be useful, for example, if you expect students to copy papers by their colleagues, by their older colleagues, and you have all of them in your database, or you expect them to copy from websites, you may use similarity checking tools, and they may be quite reliable. But if we are dealing with research papers, greater degree of responsibility and greater human involvement and expert involvement is required.
Thanks a lot. There are two questions from Theodosia. So the first one is, could you please share with us what you do to develop critical thinking within the training session?
I usually, when I do, for example, when I do online in-person training, this is the best way. You're very limited if you're trying to develop critical thinking while working with a group with many different people. But in individual training, for example, you talk to a person and you see which things are not taken right, where the misconceptions lie. So I try to demonstrate, for example, there is a conference, they got an invitation for a conference, and they are not sure whether the conference is okay or not, or whether a journal is okay or not. So I try to show them that they should check everything, and I try to show them the methodology. Okay, let's start from general internet browsers, from Google. Let's type this and that. Let's check the web domain. I mentioned in the presentation, for example, I teach them how to use Whois to check the domain. Also, a company is mentioned. Most business registers are available online. So let's check, for example, the UK business register and see that the company is not there. It's actually registered in India or somewhere else. It's okay with companies from India, but it's not okay to lie on the website that the company is. So I try to demonstrate this, to reveal the process. When they ask me, for example, is this information reliable? And I check this for them. When I answer them, I usually do this by email because I get many emails asking me such things. I try to explain the whole process in the email. Based on this information, you may conclude this. Based on this information, you may conclude this. In conclusion, this is not reliable for these and these reasons. So I intuitively came to this. I'm not trained as a trainer, but in my opinion, this is quite efficient. It takes time, it takes serious involvement, but it gives results. And I'm usually very pleased when I get, for example, an email when somebody says, okay, I've checked this website, I checked this, and still I'm not sure, can you help me? Then I see that they actually adopted what I've been explaining.
Thank you. And David also added while you were talking that critical thinking is developed by teaching how to ask questions.
Of course, and that's why I ask questions during training sessions. And provoke questions, because based on the way the question is formulated, you may learn many things, you may see many things, and you make relevant conclusions as regards the information literacy of your participants. That's why I may be quite old-fashioned, and my trainings are sometimes too serious. But I believe that language reveals quite a lot. So that's my medium. You may have your own ways, your own preferences, and then what I may say is be authentic. Use your talents. that's the most efficient. I'm not the only trainer working with those people, so well, they will benefit from other types of training for other people, and I'm doing this because I'm probably the most competent in doing this, in using these methods.
Thanks. Another question from Theodosia. Where do you normally pull your real life examples from?
I read blogs, many blogs. You can find many examples on social media, on Twitter. Twitter is probably the most intelligent of all social media. I read, well, I read regularly. I read quite a lot. I have many alerts from various blog posts, for example, Retraction Watch, Scholarly Kitchen. I use Google Alerts set to send me emails when triggered by particular keywords or phrases. So I usually have a lot of information in my inbox. And when I have to prepare training, I usually remember, oh, I've seen recently an interesting example, so I will use it in my training. It's quite easy if you organize, if you do some organization in advance, you will have plenty of them.
Thanks. Next question is from Nima. Which is the most recommended similarity checker plagiarism detector for researchers?
This is a tricky one because actually it depends on what you're trying to. If you are a journal editor and you are doing this to check whether a paper submitted to a journal is plagiarized or not, then you should use Authenticate because there is a sort of a monopoly there. They collaborate with all the researchers, with all these publishers. To the best of my experience, Wiper was not that bad, but I'm not sure whether it is fully free or not. But there were some concerns. You should always read when it comes to these kind of tools where you submit some content online. You give them some content. You never know whether store this content, whether you are doing a copyright breach, whether there are some privacy concerns. There were some concerns regarding, for example, this Viper. That's why I'm quite reluctant to recommend any of these tools. It's better if you have a tool subscribed by your university because you are sure about the policies there. You're never sure. You need to read policies and to analyze them, and you're never sure whether they've shared everything in their policies. So this is an answer this is a question that I cannot provide a good answer.
And then there is a comment and question from Sarah. The issue of percentage of similarity is a tricky one, which may not have a satisfactory solution. What would be your view? And another one from Lilian, which is a standard similarity index for all research work checked. So I guess we sort of addressed it already.
This is usually below 10%. I'm not sure that it's probably 7% at the University of Belgrade. This is centrally done by the University Library only for PhD thesis. But you cannot assess this if you don't read the paper. You have to read the paper. Sometimes the paper doesn't make any sense. So you need to read the paper. An expert needs to evaluate a paper. I'm not sure. For example, this is similar to image plagiarism. This is a new topic, and you've probably heard about Elizabeth Bick. She's very active on, she's an expert on identifying manipulated and plagiarized images in research papers. And there is usually a response to the questions saying, okay, there is artificial intelligence. You can use artificial intelligence. She still does this manually. And this is something that, and every expert will tell you, you need to evaluate it manually, and you need to have a discipline-specific expertise in order to be available to do this. I know examples of papers that passed similarity check, and then after that a reviewer identified plagiarism. There was nothing original in these papers. So I believe that artificial intelligence is still quite far from offering a sustainable solution to this question.
Thanks. There is a question from Sarah. How do you deal with the issue of bias among audience?
I enter into disputes with them. There are several types of bias. I try to make it clear and to defend my point and to provide examples. I usually try to support the correct position with arguments, with serious arguments, and to try to deconstruct the bias, to try to explain to biased people where the sources of their bias lie. For example, if a student defends a position of a professor, such a student usually doesn't have, this is a student who takes for granted what is said to him or her. So it's not so difficult. Sometimes when I enter into dispute with professors who are biased, it usually ends up in them being angry because they assume an authority position. They say, but I'm an authority. Who are you to claim this? You are just a librarian. So when it comes to this, you won actually. When it comes to the other party using this kind of argument to support their claims. Usually I win these disputes, but sometimes it's difficult. It's not very pleasant. So you need to be prepared and flexible.
Thanks. There was a question from Bernard. Do you normally conduct training session that brings together both researchers, students, and professors to advocate for zero plagiarism for consistency in academic integrity?
Yes. For example, when we go to an institution, we just invite anybody willing to come. So there are some, and I've already explained, these are the situations when these disputes occur. You just have a professor, established professor saying, but I don't agree. This is not so. And also, if such a professor is a journal editor, then these are usually the situations where the 70% argument, 70% difference has to be. We have to discuss this. So I have a combined audience. I often don't know who my audience are until I get to the host institution.
Thanks. There is also a question from Nina. Do you have any tips or recommendations on how to approach academic integrity at the undergraduate level? I know this is not your main area, but maybe you have some tips, some ideas.
I would like to get involved in this area. My kids are students now, so I have some experience. I'm not entirely unexperienced. I believe that we should change the approach. If you start the story with penalizing something, with measures taken in case of misconduct, you usually people don't feel pleasant being treated like somebody who is likely to commit misconduct. So we need to change this. For example, if you tell to kids, they are still kids, you shouldn't do this, it's likely that they will feel it exciting to try to do this, to fool the system. So we should be more creative, less assessment, more creative work, giving them assignments when they will have to be entirely creating, where they won't need to use something that is already written. So I would like very much to get involved in this kind of training and to try to, for example, I would first try to talk to them, to do some brainstorming, to hear their problems, and then to consider their problems and try to design a training that is adjusted to their problems.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, there is a nice question in the chat. I've forgotten to mention this. At what point do you say that your training to the audience are satisfactory? There is a point. I usually get some feedback and I encourage feedback. And for me, trainings are, I'm usually open to questions from anyone. My trainees are mostly not people from my institution. So I get many emails. When I get clever and insightful emails, when I see that people are actually applying what they've learned during the training session, that I say that trainings are satisfactory. This is not after the applause after the presentation means actually nothing. It is only later that I learn that my trainings were satisfactory. So it comes it comes with a delay. And sometimes this delay is longer.
Thanks. There is one unanswered question from Moses about Zotero groups, about training in the use of Zotero, but that's a bit of topic for today. In case someone knows good Zotero groups about training on Zotero, maybe you could put a link in a chat. Or
there are. Just search the groups section in Zotero. You will find many, and you have many videos on YouTube. And Zotero has great documentation, so it's very easy to use.
Thank you so much, Milica, and thank you, colleagues, for your questions. Very interesting discussion, and as you've seen, Milica, there are lots of thanks in the chat there. So it's truly very informative. And
feel free to write. You have my email in the presentation. I answer emails always.
I know, even in the middle of the night.
Yes, of course, especially in the middle of the night.
Thanks a lot. I don't see, well, I see Miodrag with raised hand, so I don't know, maybe I can.
Okay, please proceed.
Yeah, you can speak, Miodrag, if you want to. Otherwise, thanks a lot, everyone. We will create a resource on EIFL's website with Milica's slide and recording from today. You will receive an email from me with all the links. And thank you so much, Milica.
See you next week.
Yeah, Daniel is asking how to compare Zotero to Mendeley, but that would be a separate topic.
Yeah, well, I prefer Zotero because it's open source, and actually, my basic education is in humanities, so Zotero is, it seems to me, more suitable for people doing research in humanities and citing in humanities. And also there are some interesting tools in Zotero, for example, identifying retractions and such things. I very much like Zotero.
Thanks a lot, sir. It was excellent, sir. Next Wednesday, we'll have another session on EIFL's Digital Research Literacy Training Program outline. And it will be with Niamh Brennan from Trinity College Dublin. And she asked to have this training 2 hours earlier than today. So please notice this time change. If you already registered, you should have received a new update with new time. So it's now 7 GMT. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day, and thanks a million, Milica.
Thank you, Irina.